It's 3 minutes after 10. A very good morning indeed to you. Quick heads up. If you've ever wondered precisely what I mean when I use the term client journalism, and I use it quite a lot these days because, my goodness me, someone has to, then just have a little look at the Sun and the Daily Mail today if you're passing a newsagents, or indeed if they have them on display in your local library. If you want to see a sort of dictionary definition of what client journalism, which is itself probably a bit of a euphemism for propaganda, looks like, then fair play to the editors of the Daily Mail and the Sun today for providing us with an absolute masterclass of what a complete dereliction of journalistic duty in the service of an utterly undeserving political leader looks like. So well done, everybody, on that one. Can I paint a picture for you this morning? I want you to imagine, if you can, a very heavy toddler. I make no judgment about the weight of the toddler. I'm merely describing the weight of the toddler, a very heavy toddler, who is a little bit stubborn and is sitting in the aisle of your local supermarket, smearing himself with yoghurt and furiously resisting any attempt by his mother to move him along. Now, he's so heavy and so covered in yoghurt and so stubborn that the poor mother, who is of a relatively delicate build and disposition, the poor mother hasn't got a clue how to shift this lump of humanity, this yoghurt-smeared lump of humanity, from the supermarket aisle. And a small crowd is gathering. That's us, by the way, if you haven't worked out what this analogy is yet. We are the small crowd. A small crowd is gathering in the supermarket, looking on with a sense of wonder and perhaps for some people a degree of disgust, because there's a lot of yoghurt and there's a lot of smearing going on, and wondering how the hell this poor woman is ever going to get this lump of yoghurt-smeared humanity out of the supermarket aisle so that normal business can be resumed and the rest of us can get on with the important business of shopping. If you haven't worked it out yet, the mewling, yoghurt-smeared, excessively heavy toddler is Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of these islands for now. And the delicate, dismayed mother, failing miserably to move him even a single inch from his place in the supermarket aisle, is the Conservative Party. And the small crowd that is gathering to witness this horror show of parental nightmare, well, that's you and me today. And that is really probably how today's show is going to take shape. We're going to have a little chat with each other about the sight in front of us, the screaming yoghurt-smeared toddler refusing to move, insisting even that he's not a yoghurt-smeared toddler, but is in fact the king of the world, and therefore nobody can tell him to move from this supermarket aisle, regardless of how much evidence has been gathered that nobody really wants him to be there at all, least of all his mother, who we're also going to talk about. What on earth can she do to get rid of this yoghurt-smeared lump of humanity that is holding up business for pretty much everybody else in the supermarket? The phone lines are open. If you can make head nor tail of the words that have come out of my mouth thus far, the phone lines are open. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. I've enjoyed the clipping of the question lately, the attempt to focus upon particular constituencies of callers, but I need a little bit of guidance. I never know how many people listen to the programme in the hope of ringing in. It's a tiny proportion of the people listening, just by dint of numbers. If there's 1.4 million people listening and we get through, I don't know, about 30 calls per show, then obviously it's a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage. But if I say I only want to hear from people in a certain constituency and you are not yourself in that constituency, I'd hate to think that you felt alienated or excluded from proceedings. So do let me know if you don't like this approach to the yoghurt-smeared toddler. Because I am interested chiefly today in the opinions of people, and only first up, we'll move the spotlight, obviously, in the opinions of people who have either never voted anything but Conservative, or have found it very hard to contemplate voting anything but Conservative in the past. I don't know whether I coined this phrase or not. I'm certainly claiming the credit for it. That's the nature of That's the nature of the game, isn't it? But I talked a lot not long ago, and I wrote quite a lot about something that I like to call footballification. And the idea of footballification is that once you have pledged your loyalty to your team, as in football, obviously, then nothing can sway you from that position. You might abuse your own team if they make you unhappy, but you will never stop supporting them. And however much you may abuse them in the short term, you will always despise their opponents with a passion that defies logic and rationality. And I don't know whether I was right to suggest that footballification had moved up several gears in the last few years. I think I was. I think that Brexit I think even Conservative MPs now are describing it as having the air of a religious cult, this absolute commitment to a word that they can't even describe or define anymore. It's like the unknowable nature of Brexit. But leaving that aside, for me, that's when footballification reached ludicrous levels. Truly ludicrous levels. I don't care what is happening on the pitch. If a player in my team's shirt turns up with a taser and starts knocking out the opponent's defence, then that is categorically not a foul. And any referee who blows his whistle after my centre forward pulls out a taser and nobbles the opposition goalkeeper, the referee is a wing forward in a rugby scrum, to mix my metaphors, a flanker. The referee's a flanker. So I know that. And the whole theory of footballification, of course, is that nothing will ever make you take that scarf off. It is knotted indeed so tightly around your neck that the flow of blood to your brain has been almost entirely cut off. All you can do is a sort of tribal, bovine bark of loyalty towards a team decided upon entirely by the colour of the shirt. You don't even know the names of the players anymore. You don't know the tactics. You've got no idea what the score is. You might even have turned up at the wrong stadium, but if there's a team on the park dressed in green, you're going to be screaming for them until the cows come home. And that's a lot of people. Oddly, they're the least important people in politics because they will not affect change. The only people who really we should bother talking with or talking about in politics are the people who vote differently almost every election, or the people that approach any ballot with a truly open mind or a sense of curiosity about what might be best for them, or what might be best for the country, or what might be best for as yet unspecified interests. And yet here we are. We are in a footballified society. It broke a bit yesterday. Yesteryear. It broke a bit yesteryear for a lot of people who perhaps lean towards values like equality or like fairness and distribution of wealth, because the Labour Party ended up being led for quite a long time by somebody who many traditional Labour supporters found it impossible to cheer for. They did manage to remove or at least loosen their scarves to a sufficient degree that they could not only boo their own manager while despairing at what he was doing to the team, but they could even contemplate perhaps, and this is the simplest explanation for the red walls collapse, they could even contemplate perhaps cheering for the opposition, something that their parents and their grandparents had never even dreamt of doing in decades. But so that's a useful reminder that however tightly knotted the scarf may seem to be, there's no such thing as an untiable knot. So today, I think I would like people who probably reject the footballification description. So I'm not suggesting that you are tribal to the exclusion of all reason and intelligence, but you certainly would not ever have expected to be not voting Conservative. So there is a great piece I think it's in the newspaper today, about a Conservative club in one of the constituencies that's currently up for a by-election, where members of staff at the actual Conservative club are sort of saying they're going to either vote for a different party or they're not going to vote at all. And that's the constituency I'm most interested in. I don't know if we want to explore the extremities. Nick had the pleasure of doing that this morning with a caller who suggested Nadine Dorries would make an excellent replacement for Prime Minister. And as far as I'm aware, that was a genuine caller, not Rosie Holt, the satirist that we broadcast on the programme yesterday. So I don't know if we need to explore those extremities, although obviously if they present themselves, then we shall pay them the respect that they deserve. But I do want to talk to people who, until relatively recently, would perhaps have used a phrase like dyed-in-the-wool Conservative, or lifelong Conservative, or traditional Conservative. What do you make of all this? How do you process the fact that Boris Johnson now has split your party in a way that no leader, even leaders whose names over the years have rightly or wrongly become bywords for divisiveness, like Margaret Thatcher, even they didn't manage to secure such a low level of support from their own MPs. If you exclude the politicians on the so-called payroll, the ones that have positions in this government, you're looking at about 75% of Conservative backbenchers no longer have confidence in their leader. And these numbers are simply staggering. I think one of the dangers of false equivalence in the British media, as practiced chiefly by the BBC, is that when someone like James Cleverly comes forward or Simon Hart, trying to pretend that this is anything other than an absolute nightmare, a humiliating nightmare for Boris Johnson, because they hold senior positions, because Jacob Rees-Mogg is in the cabinet, you have I've said to you a few times that we don't know how to deal with a level of madness that the Constitution, unwritten though it may be, was not designed to accommodate. The same thing happened in America. So a senior cabinet minister turns up on your telly to tell you that this is a brilliant result for Boris Johnson and everybody should celebrate and he's finally silenced his critics and it's proof of yada, yada, yada. And you sort of sit there going, but, that's simply not true. The emperor's got no clothes on. And yet still the British media has to report it. And the minute it gets reported, it gets afforded a patina of credibility, doesn't it? It gets a sort of coating of credibility, of plausibility. And that's really damaging because it is a little bit like a BBC reporter or a newspaper reporter saying sections of the crowd insisted that the emperor was naked, and yet many of his most ardent supporters were describing the luxuriant nature of his new robes in poetic detail. And you sort of think, well, that's not really journalism. Either the emperor's got no clothes on or he has. And we can all see that he hasn't. So why are people like James Cleverly and Dominic Raab queuing up on the telly this morning to tell you that he's wearing beautiful? I do not know. But I do know this. We're essentially a decent bunch in this country. Essentially. There are exceptions to that observation, and sometimes perhaps the squeakier the pips get, the more tempting it is to behave in a selfish fashion or in an unkind or a self-interested fashion. But we are essentially a decent bunch, I believe. Whatever colour your scarf is, we have common ground to share together. This is something that Keir Starmer is trying desperately to reintroduce to political debate with a degree of success. But I do believe we have common ground in well, that's why we use the word common to describe it, don't we? So whatever colour your scarf is, there are things upon which historically and traditionally we would always agree. And usually those issues get filed under values. Just basic values, basic expectations of decency. Boris Johnson has none. That's a matter of fact now. It's a matter of record. He has no decency. He will never do what is right. He will only ever act in a way he perceives to be in his own best interests. And how many times have I said to you, he doesn't overcome problems, he just sits tight until they've gone away. And that brings us back to the yoghurt-smeared toddler, sitting in the dairy aisle of your local supermarket, adamantly and furiously refusing to budge even a single inch, despite the begging of his poor beleaguered mother. What do you, as a lifelong Conservative, as a dyed-in-the-wool Conservative, as a traditional Conservative, what do you think about last night's events and the bigger picture of Boris Johnson's now utterly busted flush of a government? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Help me wipe off the yoghurt. And in the spirit of yesterday's programme, I think we'll play a little game as well, which I will reveal the answer to shortly. Is this an impersonation? What's the word? Impressionist? Impersonator. Is this an impersonator or is this the real Jacob Rees-Mogg?
This is a very bad result for the Prime Minister. 117 votes against her, much worse than she thought. A third of the parliamentary party, the overwhelming majority of backbenchers have voted against her.
148 MPs, of course, voted against Boris Johnson yesterday, although there were more of them to start with. So is that the real Jacob Rees-Mogg talking about Theresa May in a way that almost demands we come up with a new definition of double standards for the Oxford English Dictionary? Or is it one of those pesky satirists that keep plaguing politicians with all too plausible suggestions of whatever nonsense they might come out with next? I'm not going to tell you the answer to that yet. I'll just give you one more chance to listen. Is this the real dog or is it a fake J-dog?
This is a very bad result for the Prime Minister. 117 votes against her, much worse than she thought. A third of the parliamentary party, the overwhelming majority of backbenchers have voted against her.
OK, so 21 minutes after 10, Conservative voters of various descriptions, various hues, but you would describe yourself as that. Call me now. Tell me what you feel about unfolding events, the detail of last night and the bigger picture of the road ahead. Melanie is in Birmingham. So is Johnny Depp at the moment, Melanie. I don't know if you knew that. What made you pick up the phone today?
Oh, right. Hi.
Hello.
I'm actually on a walk with my husband.
Oh, lovely.
We're listening to your radio show.
Fantastic. What, do you share headphones, or do you have me on a small transistor?
No, he's on speaker, on a small radio.
Is that allowed? I mean, what about, you might be disturbing other people's peace and quiet as you...
We're in a field. There's no one around.
I'm glad to hear it. Best place for me, Melanie. Best place for me. Now, what would you like to say?
I voted Conservative. I've never voted anything else.
Yeah.
I'm ashamed to actually say I did vote for Boris now. I think that PMs have enormous power, and when they abuse that power, you expect there to be checks and balances in place to restrict the power. What does Boris do? He tries to change the ministerial code.
Yes.
So that you're not lying to Parliament. So if you lie to Parliament, it's not necessarily sackable, should I say. I'm bitterly disappointed with the vote.
Well, you were hoping for an actual removal.
Yes,
Gosh.
I was. I actually was. I'm very disappointed because... he thinks he's done nothing wrong, so therefore he's not going to change anything because he believes he's done nothing wrong. And even if he did say he doesn't believe he's done something wrong, he's a liar.
You wouldn't believe him anyway. I
cannot believe anything he says.
That's a fascinating moment, isn't it? So even if he said what you want to hear, you wouldn't believe him anymore. Absolutely.
I've said to my husband, and he's of the opinion, for him it's all about the rule of law. But for me, if he said everything I wanted to hear, I wouldn't believe he was going to deliver anyway. He's reneged on just about every other promise. And the funny thing is, last night I was actually playing bridge, and we have a councillor there, a Tory councillor, who's been a councillor for 22 years.
Right.
And
you're not breaching any confidences here, are you? Well, I don't know what the rules are at bridge. Is it like Chatham House? Is it like Fight Club? The first rule of Bridge Club is that there is no Bridge Club.
Well, I like to break the rules sometimes, but let's be a bit rebellious. But funnily enough, she actually wanted Boris. She wants Boris to lose. She wanted Boris to lose at that point. We didn't know what the result was because she says you can't trust a liar. And that's a Tory council of 22 years, which did rather surprise me. So I know Rob came on, the Nick Farage, and deliver, and the big cause right. Well, he didn't get the big cause right. He hasn't got the big cause right, and they're delivering for Boris. That's all I think.
Well, I mean, crikey, you've covered a lot of ground. I guess to speculate about what motivated your bridge partner, your councillor friend, it is the fear of the further damage he's going to do to the party as much as the country by clinging on.
He's driven a coach and horses through the party, hasn't he, really? He has it, and it's sort of... I could actually vote Labour, but I don't particularly like Starmer. I don't know what he stands for.
No, I've heard that a lot.
He changes his mind. So he changes his mind. He just goes with public opinion. And I thought it was I'm deviating, but I thought it was a disgrace when he said about, there's no place for, racism in the royal family. And I'm like, hang on a minute, just because somebody makes an allegation doesn't mean it's true, and you're DPP and you come out with that comment.
Innocent until proven guilty, Melanie. Well, you'd think he was married to that principle. So your best case scenario is for the Conservative Party to replace Boris Johnson with somebody who you would have confidence in, and then you won't have to exercise too much.
But I don't know who I'd have confidence in.
No.
It's very difficult. That is the problem. He's surrounded himself by yes men who are just fearful of the job. Like Richie Sunak, I'm not going to stand against him. No, because your ratings are right at the bottom. You're never going to win.
I need to ask you. Well, I sense we could do this all day. I'm going to start bidding for no Trumps in a minute to continue this conversation. When did the penny drop, if you don't mind me asking? Because you voted in 2019. When did you sort of feel?
When was I absolutely the most disgusted?
Yes.
The Owen Pattern affair, actually. For me, to actually try and change the rules because you don't like them, it's just totally against everything I believe in. You don't change the rules because you don't like them. You live by the rules. They make the rules.
That's a brilliant answer. No, I think that people underestimate the significance of what they tried to do. And again, actually, like the rebellion against Theresa May, that was led by Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob Rees-Mogg, one of the key architects of that, as indeed he was one of the key architects of the unlawful proroguing of Parliament. Thank you, Melanie. That was really helpful for me, and a really neat illustration of what I was trying to explain at the top of the show about having even a lifelong commitment to a cause or to a party without having lost the ability to think freely and to think openly about the bigger issues. Because, and this may be a little unfair to other people listening, I don't really see how anyone can still be clinging to the carcass of the idea that Boris Johnson deserves their support. It almost speaks to me of a degree of self-loathing. If you have respect for yourself, how can you still be cheering for a man who has no respect for anybody? I don't know, maybe that's unfair. Kevin's in Sheffield. Kevin, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Kevin.
I'm on a building site, James, so if there's any inadvertent noises, please excuse me.
I will do.
Right, I've been a Conservative voter for 40 years.
Right.
And amidst all my family are Labour voters.
Yeah.
As a young child, I was taken onto Handsworth with all the riots, all the pickets. I've seen all that. So recently I've looked at all the war, been on Discord, speaking to Russians, all this. When I get to Boris Johnson and look at the world today, I have no faith in him or anyone around him. There's corruption. They all knew what they were doing. They all knew they were breaking pandemic laws.
Yes.
They're not stupid people. And if they're going to lie to the populace like they did, because they've all lied, they all knew what were going off. They're all taking the lead from Boris Johnson.
To a point, Lord Copper. I think some of the cabinet members, and this isn't to excuse their conduct or defend them, but I think there'd be people in the Conservative Party who were as shocked as we were to discover what was going on in Downing Street. I really do. Perhaps I'm being naive, Kevin, but I really do believe that.
Maybe so, because, there were people who might not have been in the premises. I mean, anyone in those premises over Christmas, I think they're all guilty. They all knew what was going on. No one said anything. So, and who we're going to vote for? As a Conservative, I look across the party now, the ranks, I don't see anyone. I can't see.
It's early days. It's a bit like whack-a-mole, and the moles haven't actually put their heads up through the holes yet. So you can't decide which moles you're going to whack until they've actually poked their heads above the parapet. Can I ask you what I asked the last caller, which is when did the penny drop, if that's not an unfair phrase to use? When did you lose the faith, as it were?
I started listening to this radio show 4 or 5 years ago.
Can't blame it on me.
No, but actually you have been a major influence in my socialist road, actually.
No wonder they're trying to get me sacked.
But basically, I followed Boris Johnson from Brexit. Yeah. And it's all, I voted Brexit, and I'm one of those people that you're going about. I didn't really look into it. No. I voted blindly. Since the Brexit, I've listened to everything, and my God, I wish I'd have never done that.
Yeah, but again, I don't like people. You didn't use the word ashamed, but the last caller did. I don't like that. I don't think people should be beating themselves up for having been too busy to question what they were being told by pretty much everybody powerful in the country, or certainly everybody powerful in the media and that wing of the Conservative Party. But it is. Yeah, it is hard to know what the road ahead is going to look like, but you know that the road behind is a road you wish that your party had never gone down. Yeah.
Oh, mate. Yeah.
Nicely put. Kevin, thank you, mate. Take care. You can get back to what you're doing today. You putting a roof on? It's a big job ahead?
This guy, he works in all the latest values for ecology and stuff. So
you're putting in all the green business.
Yeah, so we're trying to get his project, bring it in on time, because he's got a lot of pressure on him.
Well, good luck to you. I'll tell you what. I'm thinking back to the summer of 1988, Kevin, just down the road from you in Doncaster, when I spent 2 weeks working on a building site. And I tell you what, if camera phones had existed then, mate, I would never, ever, ever live it down.
It still goes off, James, don't worry. So not much has changed.
You take care, honestly. Some of the stuff, it took me like 10 hours to do what it would take one of the proper lads about 10 minutes to do. 10:31 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Holly Harris is here with your headlines. 10:35 is the time. We've rather lost sight of the yoghurt-smeared toddler, haven't we? James, the mother, says Tilly, who's in Whitby, needs to get a water cannon. I believe London had some. I think we had to scrap them after the guy who gets all the big calls right bought them without realising they were illegal, Tilly. And blast the toddler clean until he can't take it anymore and runs out of the supermarket, preferably into the path of the trolley collector. That's probably what Dominic Cummings is calling himself these days, isn't it? Sarah writes, footballification doesn't work in this case because they'd sack the manager at the first sign of such a downturn in performance. That moment has long gone. I don't know, actually. I think I most recently, I'm not going to name any managers because I don't want to get attacked by football fans, but the idea that we're just about to turn the corner, we're just about to start performing at the level we should be performing at, keeps a lot of managers or a lot of supporters on side for quite a long time. But you're right, there's usually a breaking point. And this one unsigned. Dominic Raab has insisted that the amount of yoghurt is minimal. The mother is doing everything right in trying to move the giant baby, while Jacob Rees-Mogg states that we need to change the laws on yoghurt availability. If I'd come up with that, I'd have signed it. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Astonishing opening calls on this. We're trying to confine the conversation in the first instance to people who would describe themselves as conservatives. And from a Bridge 4 yesterday evening with a councillor of 22 years, right through to Kevin, who had to step away from the building site upon which he is working, traditional Conservative voters way beyond breaking point now, just almost marvelling the fact that Boris Johnson is still clinging on to power. So do counter those positions if you want to explain why you remain absolutely loyal, despite the fact, as those two callers have pointed out, that the contempt with which he treats standards, forget about voters, the contempt with which he treats standards in the Owen Paterson affair, or in the parties, most obviously, for those two first contributors, make it very hard to understand why anyone is keeping the faith. 10:37 is the time. I have got phone lines free. This only ever happens when I confine contributions to people who fit into the category that we've described today, because I think you're worried I might ambush you or tempt you onto the programme under false pretences and then rip your throat out like a furious frisson bichou. Well, I was about to come up with the name of an exotic dog there. I should have just gone with Shih Tzu. I won't, I promise. I want to hear what your thinking is today. That's all. 0345 6060 973. Elspeth is in Sutton. Elspeth, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning.
Hello.
Yes, I have a lot to say, really. I think.
Well, take your time, fill your boots. I do.
I think, I do consider myself to have been a lifelong Conservative voter, as were my parents, and grandparents, etc. But, I mean, there is no hope now. There is not a chance in hell of me ever voting for them again, I don't think.
Even after a change of leader?
Well, what do I see around them? I mean, these people on my television screen this morning... going out to the nation, insulting us even more than they've insulted us previously, to tell us that this was an amazing result. How is this an amazing result? 148 people don't want you. And this wasn't a general election. No. This was a one-horse race. And
trying to compare it to the last leadership election, claiming his mandate has increased. That was a curious mixture of hilarious and horrifying, wasn't it?
I mean, what a joke. What a joke this man is. What a joke they all are. He's surrounded himself by people who just haven't got a clue. I'm just insulted. I mean, it's just insulting people's intelligence.
What motivates them? I guess in some cases it's pretty clear that they wouldn't ever enjoy this sort of level of advancement under any other Prime Minister. But even that feels a little unkind to attribute it all to selfishness. I suppose what I'm asking, what they see that you can't see. What do you think it does that motivates? So let's pick on James Cleverly today.
Job protection.
Right, yeah.
They're looking after themselves. That's all they're interested in. I mean, I wrote to our MP, who is I live in a constituency that fluctuates. It's Tory at the moment. It could be Liberal Democrat at any point. It goes back and forth over the years.
Yes.
So he's not in a strong position because it has gone either way previously. And I wrote to him twice. My husband wrote to him. I mean, the response that we got was just one of, I'm really sorry to hear about, you lost people. Yeah. I lost my job. I worked in the travel industry for over 30 years, and I lost my job. But I take that because I think I'm lucky. I'm alive. I'm healthy.
Sure.
And, losing my job,
And that's more a consequence of global pandemic than it is of governmental incompetence,
isn't it? Of course it is. But you put that down to it. But when you think of all the sacrifices that people made, and that smug look on that idiot's face. I'm sorry, but...
Sorry, which one are you talking about now, Elspeth?
Well, who do we think?
I don't know.
Boris Johnson.
Not Raab or Priti Patel or James Cleverly or Liz Truss or... No, OK, just specifically Johnson.
All of them, actually. But the smug look and the patronising behaviour towards us, as if, we haven't got a clear thought in our own heads. I just don't get it. You've lost sight of it. It isn't about your job. It's not about self-protection. It's about doing what's right, that has been to hell and back.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming back. But do right by us and show us that you're leaders. Anyone can be a manager. Anyone can manage the country. But to lead us. And if that is all we've got to lead us, what we're seeing in that front bench, God help us.
It's not... I sometimes overthink things. I'm really, really enjoying the calls today because it's actually all quite straightforward and simple, isn't it? There are just... You can pick an example of something that breaks the bond between Conservative Party and Conservative voter. And possibly because I'm not traditionally either, I find it fascinating to hear from these ringside seats. It's pretty straightforward where you are and why you're there, isn't it, Elspeth?
Yeah, absolutely. And at the moment, I can't ever see a time again when that is where my cross would go.
Well, I think you will change. I don't know, but I think
so much to pull back, and we can all turn things around. Of course, we can.
Yes.
Turn around the lies, the cheating, the smugness, the condescending, the patronising. We don't need it. What we need is honest people with integrity to stand up and lead the country.
We don't need another hero.
I am sorry. I want to see it. I look for it every day.
Everyone's telling me
and
this.
I hope that one day, in the next few months, he's going to show that that's where I can put my cross.
See, I have thoughts about Starmer as well, and I hadn't realised what they were until yesterday. I had the pleasure of interviewing him not long ago for a big full sit-down, which I found incredibly helpful and illuminating. I came out of it with a much higher opinion of him than I had before. I didn't have a low opinion before, but I shared a lot of the fear, the ambivalence that you describe. But I saw something yesterday, and I don't know whether this will resonate with you or not. I saw him giving his statement immediately after the result came in. And what I saw was someone who is not very good at university debating. He has his moments at PMQs, but he is not a showman. He is not a kind of a show off. And that's what people want to see still. I'm describing myself here. I'm not criticising anybody else. You kind of think, why isn't he landing rhetorical punches? Why isn't he embarking upon wonderful flourishes? That's not what he does. So I think what Starmer needs to do is actually drive home the value, perhaps, of not being somebody who's very good at insults or somebody who gets down and dirty to win university debating things. The Led by Donkeys lads put together an astonishing litany of offence throughout Boris Johnson's entire life, starting with his school days, when his teacher famously said that he honestly seems to think it's churlish of us to expect him to live by the standards that bind the rest of us. And that's so true as well. So Starmer's problem is that he's not a show pony, and he's living in a world where show ponies now have thrived for quite a long time. I don't know. I'm overthinking again. Elspeth, thank you. David is in Chorley. David, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I'm a lifelong Conservative voter, but no more. For me, it started with the Cummings fiasco.
The Barnard Castle business. That's when Roger Gale, I'd forgotten that Roger Gale, who's one of the most prominent opponents of Johnson within the party, he sent his letter in after Barnard Castle. So credit to him where credit is due.
Absolutely. And I wish the rest had the same integrity. But for Boris Johnson, well, in fact, let's start with Rees-Mogg, as I call him. For him to come on and say it was a victory after he talked about a better result for Theresa May.
I don't know that that's really him. That may not be him. That could still be a satirist. I haven't done the reveal on that yet, David. That might be one of those pesky comedians doing an impression.
There's nobody else that looks as ridiculous as him.
I'll give you that.
So I can't see that. But Boris Johnson then, after using his ignorance of there being parties as his defence for getting it wrong, then says yesterday he would do it again.
I'm glad you've picked up on that because we haven't mentioned that yet. Reports from the 1922 committee meeting where he was sort of pleading for his political life. No one's challenged this or contradicted it. He said he would do it all again in the context of the parties that he attended. That's incredible, right? That's incredible.
Absolutely insults our intelligence. It puts another smear, because he's not going to leave a mark. He's going to leave a stain when he leaves.
Blimey.
But for me, he's again insulted all those that lost loved ones by saying he would do it all again. You know, does that mean that if there's another royal that dies the night before, there'll be another big party with people being sick? It's atrocious. It's just horrible.
I sense, David, that you won't be drawing a line under it and moving on.
No, not at all. Well, I am moving on from the Conservative Party, yes. But I'm not sure where my ex is going. I honestly don't know where. I'm going to listen to you, James, and maybe take a punt on where your conversations take people's thoughts.
That's an incredible honour and responsibility that you bestow upon me, and all I can do is promise you that I will take it seriously. But we must point out at 10:46, this is not great listening for the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, either. Although the immediate response will be a degree of satisfaction that so many disaffected Conservatives are so clearly and concisely explaining their reason for abandoning their traditional home. They're not exactly queuing up outside Labour's door either, and that has to be partly the responsibility of the current leader. 10:46 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think we're live in Ukraine next for an update on what is happening there. I promised you last week that we were going to step up our efforts to keep across events there, even as we pass the 100-day mark, and much of the Western political and media establishments give it much less attention than they were at the outbreak of war. So we'll do that next, and then I imagine we'll continue with this conversation after that, because it is, of course, the biggest story in town. And the question is, for traditional Conservatives, what do you make of this? How are you processing this remarkable assault upon the integrity and the history of your own party? And then, of course, we'll move on to people whose interest is broader, and it's the national interest that they are concerned about. And it can't be good news, can it? Because I don't know whether you've forgotten this. You've got 2 by-elections on the horizon and the Privileges Committee investigating whether or not he lied to the House of Commons, which I think for most of us, that investigation, and indeed for his own anti-corruption czar who resigned yesterday, it'd take about 10 seconds to conduct that investigation, wouldn't it? And come back with a unanimous result from pretty much any imaginable jury. 10:47 is the time. 10:51 is the time, and a really interesting roundup of front pages, which I referred to at the top of the programme by urging you to have a look at The Sun or the Daily Mail today if you're ever confused by what I mean when I use the phrase client journalism. I should have added in England, because as is often the case with a kind of, I don't know quite whether you'd say a corrupt media, but certainly a dishonest media, they change their story according to the audience that it is aimed at. So here are the front pages from a Scottish newsagent this morning. Boris body blow despite winning confidence vote. Got Borexit done. Clown but not out is the Sun's front page. A million miles away from the nonsense that's been peddled on the English edition's front page. Ditto the Daily Mail, who in Scotland go for Boris clings on, but at what cost? Whereas in England you get Boris vows I'll bash on. So I just thought that would be quite a helpful illustration again of what I mean. I guess the first casualty of corrupt politics is truth, which is an adaptation of a phrase that's normally applied to war. Luke Harding is a correspondent for The Guardian in Kiev and joins us now partly to help us make sure that we keep an eye on events. And I'll begin, if you don't mind, Luke, by asking how you as a professional deal with the knowledge that the longer a war like this goes on, the less attention your readers back at home potentially pay to it.
Yeah, hi James. I mean, I think there are sort of 2 problems facing the Ukrainian government at the moment, where I am, Kiev. I've just got back, by the way, from a trip to the front line in the east. One of them is weapons. There's still, everyone I talk to is still saying they want more heavy weaponry from the US to the UK, from everybody. But the other is the fear that as the story drops off the pages, as domestic politics comes to the fore, Boris Johnson, his slow death, etc., that people will forget that 150 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed a day, 800 are injured. There's a raging war going on for the Donbass, being fought with artillery, rocket launchers, machine guns, in which civilians are dying, men, women, and children. It's a terrible conflict. It's Europe's biggest war for 80 years, and it's important.
It clearly is important, and you've clearly been in the thick of it. Is it in the Donbass now the worst it's been anywhere in the conflict?
I think it is. What's interesting is I was in Slavyansk, which is 12 kilometers away from the front line. I was in Bakhmut, where you could hear the outgoing thump of Ukrainian artillery all the time. I saw, for the first time, I've done a lot of wars, but I saw a Smersh rocket launcher on the Ukrainian side firing, leaving these sort of dirty brown streaks in the sky, and then outside Donetsk, we got slightly too close to the front line, and artillery shells were coming in, and you hear this eerie, spooky, chilling whistle. These are the conditions in which lots of civilians live. Some people have left. A lot of people have not left. They claim they've got elderly relatives, stubborn men who refuse to go. Much love cats. Yes. And you've got this grinding Second World War style fight with just a huge population caught in the middle.
You mentioned, is there any way of getting a notion of numbers or proportions? Because I suppose one of the things we're a little bit complacent about back in Britain is the idea that so many people got out, and so the attacks upon civilians, I guess, shock us even more than they would have done if it wasn't for the exodus of refugees.
Well, some people for sure get out, and also Ukrainian soldiers try and evacuate people, but very often they come under fire. I've talked to soldiers who are trying to get people out, and their armored vehicles hit by RPG. It flips over. Most people survive, but it was traumatic. There are a lot of people in basements who are just so sort of terrified that they feel unable to leave, even though actually they should have left already. James, 800 kids have been killed in this war. 25,000 people killed in Mariupol. The whole cities in the east where I've just been, which no longer exist, they're just an apocalypse of ruins and kind of burnt out houses. And also where I've been, a lot of damage from airstrikes. That's the thing that people say is most terrifying. They hear the whine of planes, and it's always a heart-stopping moment.
And a question that I suppose applies as much, if not more, today as it did after a week of conflict is, do we have any idea what the end will look like? Has your view of that changed? This maximalist approach that's still being promoted in the West, despite the West's failure to join in and even perhaps to send as much support as it could. So do we know what the end might look like?
We don't. I just my feeling. We spoke about this last time, but it's going to be a long, bitter, grinding war. I don't see any resolution this summer or indeed this year. I think Putin's war aims keep changing. Originally, he wanted to seize Kiev. That didn't work. Now he's concentrating incredible firepower on the Eastern Theater, and probably they'll take a few more cities there. But, the Ukrainians, if they had the right weapons, they say that they could sort of seize back the south, which they've lost, and the coast towards the Sea of Azov. But for now, they're just holding their position, but at sort of terrible cost. But they're motivated.
Yes.
They say we're defending our homes, our kids, our wives, our loved ones, and the Russians are just fighting for money. That may be true, but there are more Russians and they have more weapons.
And is there an obvious boost weapon-wise that I see Zelensky, as we speak, is speaking to the editor of the Financial Times, actually, so he might be addressing this at the precise moment. But is there anything obvious and easily doable that the West and perhaps the UK specifically should be doing to increase that support?
Yeah, I mean, the governments have briefed out over the weekend that they're sending three, we think, multiple launcher rocket systems to Ukraine, which is great. And the Americans are sending a few more. But they say, I was talking to a Ukrainian government official, senior one, they say we need 60. If we have 60, we can turn the tide of the war. Right. And what we've seen kind of incrementally Western countries stepping up. But actually, from the Ukrainian perspective, they need more and they need it now because they say, look, this is a fight for freedom against totalitarianism. And you think it's all about Ukraine. Well, actually, you guys are next. And I think there is something in that.
That's not landing, though, is it, Luke? I mean, it is landing in parts of Europe, but it's certainly not landing here.
No. I mean, just on sort of Boris Johnson Day. I mean, the other kind of paradox is Boris Johnson is fantastically popular in Ukraine. I mean, it pains me to say so as a kind of Guardian journalist, but they all love him. They've named streets over him. They even from
fantastically popular here once.
Well, right. You hear shouts of "God save the Queen."
Yes.
And last week I was on another front line in the south in Mykolaiv, and I saw a commander, and he had propped up in his office. He had a used NLAW. That's the anti-tank missiles the Brits have been sending, and what it is that Britain, whether it's Boris Johnson or not, they actually delivered this stuff.
And other countries haven't. Or haven't done as much.
They haven't done as much. They've been a bit more tormented about it. But I think for the Anglo-Saxons, this is a kind of easy, unambiguous war where you support good over evil, and don't mention all the Russian money that's gone into the Conservative Party over the past 15 years.
All the peerages, and of course we're less reliant on the gas as well, which focuses the mind of some of our European allies. Luke Harding, do look after yourself. I hope that's not an inappropriate thing to say, but I mean it.
No, thank you.
Luke Harding there, live from Kiev, where, as you heard, he's just back from the front line with a situation now which is, the worst war Europe has seen since 1945, by some distance, I think. And I say that with an understanding of what happened in Yugoslavia, but the league table is an entirely inappropriate way in which to think about it. But that for 800 children dead, it's unbelievable, genuinely unbelievable. And as we had to address, I think, the inevitable shift of attention away, even as the war arguably gets worse than it was when we were talking about it all day, every day. I don't know what the answer is to that, but I do know that thanks to people like Luke, we can have eyes, we can have windows on the ground to tell us what is happening. Back to domestic politics next, and this continuing chaos. 3 minutes after 11 is the time. That was really special. Thank you. I appreciate I haven't always created an environment into which people who identify as lifelong Conservative voters are necessarily going to feel comfortable. But I do passionately believe, and I use the word passionately advisedly there, I passionately believe in the importance of common ground, something that can upset everybody. A few messages coming in saying, ask these Tories what they did about this and what they did about that. And I get that. I really do. But I can't have the conversations I wanted to have today if I'm going to hit them over the head with their support for everything from the bedroom tax to cuts in universal credit. And also, I will do that on another day. So if I want to get interested, I want to have interesting conversations and respectful conversations with people who come from different places from me politically, then you can't be wheeling out every complaint and grievance under the sun about the track record of the party that they're ringing in to talk about supporting. I will, however, solve this little mystery for you. I asked you earlier in the programme whether you felt this was the real J-Dog or a fake J-Dog.
This is a very bad result for the Prime Minister. 117 votes against her, much worse than she thought. A third of the parliamentary party, the overwhelming majority of backbenchers have voted against her.
Now, by all of those metrics, Boris Johnson has done worse than Theresa May. That was Jacob Rees-Mogg, the real version, talking about Theresa May's vote of no confidence, 6 months after which she gave up the ghost as leader of the Conservative Party. And I wasn't sure today whether to go in on Jacob Rees-Mogg or Nadine Dorries, because Nadine Dorries, in a very unhinged attack upon Jeremy Hunt, yes, a former Foreign Secretary in the same party as Nadine Dorries, she essentially said that the Tories were utterly ill-prepared after 9 years of Tory rule. When would we date 3 years ago, the pandemic really kicked in. Well, anyway, after about 9 years, the best part of a decade of Tory rule, Nadine Dorries thought that she would score points over Jeremy Hunt by saying that the Tories had left the country completely ill-equipped and ill-prepared to cope with the pandemic. Just pause and think about that. That is the calibre of our cabinet now. Somebody who's attacking a colleague and thinks that it is a zinger or a win to publicly state that after 9 years of government by her own party, the country had been rendered utterly ill-equipped to cope with the onset of a global pandemic. I may even read you that thread. I shared it with you yesterday, but the mind actually boggles at how, and you don't know whether she was allowed to do that or whether it was approved from above. The fact that it's a 4-tweet thread with no spelling mistakes suggests to me that she probably did have some help with it, but I don't know. We'll have a look at that a little bit later. But as I suggested to you yesterday, I think there's a danger of taking one or two senior Tories as being evidence of anything bigger, because the put this politely, that there is a level of eccentricity among some of them that means they're probably not helping us come to any or better understanding of bigger issues. And there is, of course, a danger that Jacob Rees-Mogg fits into that category as well. But I think that the simple comparison of what happened to Boris Johnson yesterday with Jacob Rees-Mogg's analysis of what happened to Theresa May when he led an attempted coup against her leads us to a question that everybody can answer, regardless of where you sit politically or ideologically or even geographically. Because he's made some mealy-mouthed attempt to disown this statement, but I don't remember him doing so right up until the point that Boris Johnson suffered an even worse drubbing in a confidence vote than Theresa May. So listen again to what Jacob Rees-Mogg said about Theresa May, and then let's just talk about him. Let's talk about him as an emblem of this particular breed of cabinet minister or senior Conservative. I can't remember whether he's still in the cabinet or not as Minister for Brexit Opportunities. How can they do this? How can he stand up in public and describe Theresa May's experiences in the way that you're about to hear, and then, what is it, not even 2 years later, it is nearly 3 years later, describe Boris Johnson's worse performance as being some sort of glorious victory? That is a question that is a bit like questions that we've asked before, but it's not a question we've specifically asked before because this only happened yesterday. So he is and I think he's a useful figure to use at this point, because he has managed to accrue a following of people who think, and I say this with love and affection, people who think that because he sounds so posh, he must be clever. People who mistake education for intelligence and think that when somebody uses Latin words or long words, they must therefore be possessed of a brain, a big brain. And what breaks my heart on a political and an emotional level is that an awful lot of the people who doff their caps and tug their forelocks at Jacob Rees-Mogg are categorically cleverer than he is, but they will never believe that of themselves, because I don't want to say anything that might cast even a vague shadow over the celebrations of the Jubilee at the weekend, but the way the class system is structured in this country means that you have to believe. You can only sustain the status quo if people in the lower orders genuinely believe that the people in the upper orders are better than them by some unknowable metric. They are better than them. That's not for the likes of us. That sort of status is not for the likes of us. Altogether now, the rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate, God made them high and lowly and ordered their estate. So Jacob Rees-Mogg fascinates me because he is quite stupid. And yet people think that he is knowledgeable or intelligent because he talks so poshly. I mean, the one encounter I've had with him is incredible now in retrospect, given the utter nonsense that he was spouting without either expecting challenge or even apparently acknowledging reality. But forget about that and focus on this. You have one man who's a member of one party, okay, talking about two leaders. Leader number one suffers a humiliation in a vote of no confidence, but wins. And he describes it in the terms you're about to hear. Leader number two suffers a worse humiliation. This is the crucial point. A worse humiliation in a vote of no confidence. And the same man, the same Jacob Rees-Mogg, insists that it is some sort of resounding victory and an enhancement of a mandate. I just want you to talk to me. I don't know how long this will last. I'm inviting you to engage in a little bit of amateur psychology. It might only entertain us until 10:30, or it might go off like a Catherine wheel. I genuinely don't know, because I can't begin to imagine how somebody like this sleeps at night. How we have it on the record. We have a tape of the man describing a humiliation that we might give a 7 out of 10 in apocalyptic terms. When his man then has a humiliation that we will call a 9 out of 10, he tries to paint it as a positive. Just talk me through that. You can be as crass or as clever as you want, all right? Because I don't get that. I look at Boris Johnson and I see precisely nothing that would explain how even the most sycophantic man in the land of sycophants could still be debasing themselves on Boris Johnson's behalf in this way. So here is what he said about Theresa May's 7 out of 10 vote of confidence humiliation.
This is a very bad result for the Prime Minister. 117 votes against her, much worse than she thought. A third of the parliamentary party, the overwhelming majority of backbenchers have voted against her.
Now, all of that is true and then some about Boris Johnson's vote of confidence yesterday. So just talk me through how he can be so completely dissembling and disingenuous, because I don't get it. I'm going to open up the phone lines now. It's a bit of a weird one, but it's an important one. 0345 6060 973. I can't let you libel him or anything like that, but I can certainly let you sail pretty close to the wind in a description of how someone, stroke anyone, can describe circumstances that are less bad than the ones he's now describing as positives in such a negative and condemning way. Okay? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's coming up to 13 minutes after 11. I'm going to find you a useful clip now of him describing yesterday's vote as opposed to the one that Theresa May endured after Jacob Rees-Mogg led an attempted coup against her, and I'll play you that shortly. I'll have that ready for you in just a minute, maybe even before we take the next break. You have to sort of collar him on a doorstep or something like that. They sent Dominic Raab round to humiliate himself in the television and radio studios this morning, but I cannot begin to understand. I mean, is it misogyny? Is it simple sexism? Does he subscribe to a school of thought that thinks because Theresa May was a woman, then when she has a 7 out of 10 humiliation, it's somehow worse than when a man has a 9 out of 10 humiliation? Is it about Brexit? Is it because Theresa May saw the madness of Brexit, but then very loyally and dutifully decided that she had to take the job of introducing it in as least damaging a way as possible, and therefore Jacob Rees-Mogg thinks that a 7 out of 10 humiliation for a Remainer is somehow worse than a 9 out of 10 humiliation for a leaver? And he's not even, as many Conservatives are telling me now, he's not even a proper leaver. The worse Brexit goes, the more people will claim that Boris Johnson has betrayed them by not delivering the mythical land of unicorns that they were certain was both on the agenda and something that they can vote for. So it's coming out to 11:15. Just talk me through that. I say it again, it's a weird question. It's not one I would normally go for, but these are very, very weird times. How can one man, one politician, do this yesterday?
It's a good victory for the Prime Minister. He won comfortably, and now he is getting on business. Cabinet this morning, there's a lot to be done. But it was a good result for the Prime Minister. He won. And he won by more than the one I had said was enough.
Having said this about a less damaging result for a previous Prime Minister.
This is a very bad result for the Prime Minister. 117 votes against her, much worse than she thought. A third of the parliamentary party, the overwhelming majority of backbenchers have voted against her.
And all right, just as a little bit of self-indulgence, if you are of the view that Jacob Rees-Mogg is a stand-up guy who can be trusted and you know, constantly runs rings around lefties and woke mobs, how do you lie straight in bed tonight? He's your man, right? If you're still tugging your forelock, give me a quick call and tell me what on earth you're tugging your forelock at. 18 minutes after 11 is the time. So I let me introduce the word doublethink into proceedings. It'll save you tuppence. Doublethink is a process of indoctrination in which subjects are expected to simultaneously accept two conflicting beliefs as truth, often at odds with their own memory or sense of reality. Doublethink is related to, but different from, hypocrisy. That, of course, is a brief précis of the word's use in George Orwell's famous 1984. Here is doublethink in glorious Technicolor, live on your televisions in the course of the last 4 years. Doublethink like you have never seen doublethink before, coming from the mouth of a man who some people in this country still believe to be worthy of respect or a role in government. And in that number, Boris Johnson at least subscribes to the second bit. He thinks he's worthy of a role in government. I speak, of course, of Jacob Rees-Mogg. Here he is talking about Theresa May's victory in a vote of no confidence ballot in the Conservative Party, which went better for her than yesterday's went for Boris Johnson. So a little shorter version for you.
It's a good victory for the Prime Minister. He won comfortably, and
No, that was the wrong one. This is him talking about Theresa May.
this is a very bad result for the Prime Minister. 117 votes against her, much worse than she thought.
And here he is talking about Boris Johnson.
It's a good victory for the Prime Minister. He won comfortably, and now he is getting on business. Cabinet this morning, there's a lot to be done. But it was a good result for the Prime Minister. He won, and he won by more than the one I had said was enough.
We'll have to do that again, Keith, for the clips at some point in the next hour, because we don't want the mistake going out on the clips. 20 minutes after 11. So just talk me through how Jacob Rees-Mogg can do that. That's all I want to know, in your view. And you can say it as a supporter or as a detractor, although obviously if you're a supporter, then there'll be a couple of other questions that I'll have to throw into the mix as well. Beth's in Buckhurst Hill. Beth, what do you reckon?
I reckon that this is a really good question. It's a question I've been asking myself a long time, actually.
Good.
I reckon that he has to keep Boris Johnson on side because no other self-respecting Prime Minister would have him in Cabinet. After all the gaffes he's made with the Grenfell Tower comments and stupid things like that and all the toffee-nosed, narcissistic, nasty stuff that he does and says, he knows that if any other Prime Minister came in, he'd be gone.
But he doesn't have to. I mean, it's the knowledge that he's contradicting himself, making himself...
He doesn't care.
Well, he must care. He must care. I mean, how could you not care?
But how could Boris Johnson say and do the stupid things he does and think that we don't notice? None of them, as long as they have the power, as long as they are in the position that they want to be in, as long as they get what they think they want or need or deserve, anything goes. And they could not care less about the rest of us in the process. They will trample on us, they will lie to us, they will do whatever they can to keep their power.
And we're talking about a curious melange of status and self-image here, because he doesn't need the money, but he needs the sense of self. He needs evidence that he's not the man that in his darkest thoughts he thinks he is. And if he can sustain
these...
He has
no other discernible skills other than being a toffee-nosed what's-it that looks down on everyone.
No, he made a ton of money in the city, I think, doing investments and things like that. That is clearly a discernible skill of sorts, however you want to cut or dice it. Admittedly, it's a path that seems to be a heck of a lot easier to pursue if you're the son of a lord who went to Eton than it would be if you were the son of a docker who didn't. But we'll leave that observation for another day.
He doesn't seem to be able to engage brain and show any kind of compassion or empathy or common sense.
But when he's in church on Sunday, or when he's in confession, and I speak as a fellow Catholic, so I know the rubric and things like that. How does he square his conscience with the knowledge that what he said about Theresa May and what he said about Boris Johnson render him, at the very least, profoundly dishonest, and at the very worst, almost treacherous from the point of the national interest?
But you could ask that of very many Christians.
Yeah, but I'm asking you about him.
Oh,
how does he do it? Does he just close his conscience? Does he turn his inner voice off? Does he just literally pretend it never happened? How do you do it? How do you get through it?
I think because the reason that you and I asked that question is why we're not in politics.
Maybe.
Because we couldn't, but he can.
There's plenty of politicians who couldn't, on both sides of the House. I genuinely believe that. In fact, there's 148 in the Tory party. We know that there are. We may not know who they all are, but we know that there are. And I guess I wonder whether we know people like this in other walks of life. I've never come across it. I must have done. I'm not thinking hard enough. I must have come across it. It's like that line in Richard III, I can smile and murder when I smile. It's utterly detached from the normal standards, the normal rules. What was it that the teacher said about Johnson? I honestly believe he thinks it's churlish of us to expect him to abide by the rules that bind the rest of us. And I guess Rees-Mogg isn't necessarily like that. I can't imagine him being a rule breaker at school, but he is almost in thrall to the bully, to the rebel. And therefore, this is all his dreams come true, having a role in Boris Johnson's government. I don't know. From Beth to Becky, from Buckhurst Hill to Kenilworth. Becky, what do you think?
Hiya. Just on the comment you made earlier about is what Jacob Rees-Mogg saying is that does it have a misogynistic element?
Yeah.
And so I think there is a gendered element to it because when women are perceived to fail, it is seen as a much bigger deal than when men fail. And obviously there was a big difference between the amount of no confidence votes that Theresa May got versus Boris. And so I think when women don't succeed, they're sort of more punished for it. Whereas with Boris, he got a huge amount of no confidence votes, but it just seems like it's going to be business as normal. So I think there is a gendered element to what he was saying.
If it was? If it was a woman that Rees-Mogg liked, then this wouldn't necessarily apply, or a woman that I guess I'm interested in whether you think Jacob Rees-Mogg would be capable of such moral corruption in servitude to a woman. If it was Margaret Thatcher, for example, I bet he could have done this, couldn't he?
Yeah, but I think it sort of ties in with what was the goal at the time. Clearly, at the time, Theresa May wasn't doing the job as he saw fit. So maybe that's why he saw it as a.
Yes.
Maybe that's why he was going so extreme with it's done after failure, she needs to be gone kind of thing. Whereas with Boris, in his mind, has sort of gotten the work done of quote unquote getting Brexit done. Then maybe he's more.
So the truth doesn't matter at all then to someone like Rees-Mogg. Once the cultishness of Brexit has polluted him, if there was anything pure there in the first place to be polluted, then once the cultishness of Brexit has polluted his conscience, the truth ceases to matter, and all that matters is service to the cult, whether it's the cult leader or the cult ideology, the Brexit.
Yeah, and and he'll find, and I'm sure if that clip was brought up to him, he would find some way of spinning it.
I think he has. He said something like, lots of people told me this was wrong and I now agree with them, but he neglected to mention that at any point prior to yesterday. Bless him.
Again, it's all in service of, what is the goal and, and just the sort of, the phrase, reject everything you've seen before, even if it completely contradicts what I'm doing now.
It is breathtaking, and we're talking about it so calmly, all of us, you and Beth and me and bunch of texters coming in, filling Sidcup up next. I can't believe we're talking so calmly. In fact, I'm going to hit you over the heads with the clip again. So here he is. I need to get the percentages in front of me. So here he is talking about Theresa May receiving 117 votes of no confidence.
This is a very bad result for the Prime Minister. 117 votes against her, much worse than she thought.
And here he is talking about Boris Johnson receiving 148 votes of no confidence.
Good victory for the Prime Minister. He won comfortably, and now he is getting on business.
Come on, even if you despise every fibre of my being and you only listen as a form of penance, how can you let anybody get away with this? Phil's in Sidcup. Phil, what do you reckon?
Oh, just the utter lunacy, James, isn't it? It's, but I don't think it's misogynistic. I think it's, again, it's all psychology. It's tribalism. It's the Brexit bit. It's certainly he sees.
But there's no one else. There's loads of people who are welded to Brexit. There's loads of people who still bend the knee to Boris Johnson, and none of them would be so crass, so pathetic as that, would they?
I don't know. It's the old school Etonian thing as well, isn't it?
Rory Stewart went to Eton. I'm going to have to defend some of my old pals who went to Eton College at this occasion, because they're not all built like Jacob Rees-Mogg or Boris Johnson. Rory
Stewart has a cognitive function, doesn't he?
Yes.
That's the thing
and
that sets him apart from. And a conscience, yeah. I mean, Rees-Mogg is just, I don't know. But the funny thing is, James, just quickly, is that I probably was one of those people that listened to Rees-Mogg, and because of his posh voice and accent, thought he was knowledgeable, and now obviously you strip it apart and you realise just what an utter...
How long would he have lasted if he sounded like Danny Dyer, Phil?
Oh, no, exactly. I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't know where you go with this. I mean, James, it's just stupidity of the heart. I mean, I don't. But the thing is I still know people that will still back Rees-Mogg as much as they'll back Johnson, and they're relatively educated people. I don't know. It's this sunk cost fallacy. This thing that I don't know with the confirmation. You're so wedded to an idea that that cognitive dissonance you get, that you can't. You've got a best friend but has committed a heinous crime. But how do you back him still, or do you not? And it's that. That deliberation, what do you do, and it must really hurt you, sort of thing. Either way, I guess. I don't know.
It damages your sense of self, I suppose, to admit the truth, because you then become flawed and vulnerable and fallible and all of those things, and none of us want to feel that way.
Exactly.
Thank you, Phil. It is a mystery. I don't know if any. I mean, can you be a reformed sociopath? Can anybody ring us and tell us that they used to be like this and they would once have? Because it very rarely lands quite so completely. They're normally Johnson, I think, is clever enough never to actually make it so blatant, never to make it so clear, and then Rees-Mogg not bright enough to come up with a choice of words that would have allowed him to avoid this level of humiliation, to be describing two separate events in two completely contradictory ways, despite the fact that the event he described in glowing terms was measurably worse than the event he described in castigating terms. I in a million years possibly won't be able to get my head around this, but we'll try for at least another half an hour. Holly Harris is here now with your headlines.